everybody. I have not shot a log in a really long time. I'm so sorry. I kind of forgot I was doing them, I think. So anyway, I'm just back from a cruise to Alaska with a slew of knitters. We ended up having a bigger group than I had originally anticipated because so many people wanted to come to Alaska. But there were almost 70 of us total, and 47 of them were knitters. I was super lucky in that it was summer vacation, so my daughter Bella was able to join me in Alaska and help me out because I really needed an assistant, and she was awesome. She was just like game to help, and then she was very fun to play with. And I think everybody else had as good a time I had. I know I had one of probably my top trips of all time going to Alaska. Being on the cruise was super fun. There was just the right amount of balance of down and knitting time and then classroom time, and then when we were at port we did really active things like mountain biking down a hill across the border from Canada, and we hiked up to a lake and we hiked to a glacier, and we just, I think, balanced out the sitting around and knitting with being really active, which worked out very well, and also balanced out all the eating that happens on a cruise, which is, I feel like I turned into a piece of salmon on that trip because I ate salmon like, it felt like more than 3 times a day because sometimes there would be salmon appetizers. Pretty good. Luckily I love salmon. I think if you weren't a salmon lover, you would just choose some other things to eat at times. But the reason I'm shooting this log is not to make you jealous for not joining us in Alaska, although of course I wish you could have joined us. It is to tell you about the design that I designed for the cruise to Alaska, and it's called the Bering Shawl, and I worked on it all spring. I worked with Sweet Georgia Yarns, who's out of Vancouver, because I knew that we were going to be visiting Sweet Georgia before we went on the cruise. So it made sense to use a yarn from a dyer that we were visiting. And the design really kind of invokes a lot of different pieces of Alaska, with the caveat that I designed something for going to Alaska without having ever been to Alaska. So I totally own that I made a few leaps along the way as I was being inspired by a place I had never been to before. So the design is called Bering Shawl, and it has a bunch of different elements to it. And what I wanted to do with Bering Shawl is design something that would be really portable, so easily like just take pieces of it with you around on the boat, and once you got into the pattern and learned its tricks, you'd be able to knit and chat with your friends. But also something that then would become bigger and a little more voluminous in the end, because I find sometimes that some of my pieces are smaller than I want them to be because I get limited by the amount of yarn. So everybody on the trip got the yarn to make this design, which was 1 Sweet Georgia Party of 5 set and 2 skeins of Tough Love sock, and I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. But I kind of want to break down the bits of the Bering Shawl for you. So in the Bering Shawl, first what you do is you make 5 icebergs. And the 5 icebergs, every iceberg starts with a tip, and that's like, that's really funny. You start with 5 glaciers. I originally called them icebergs in the pattern, and then when we were on the cruise, we realized that we never saw an iceberg, like it was all glaciers all the time. So I renamed the icebergs to glaciers. So now they're glaciers, formerly known as icebergs. So this glacier starts with a tip right here. It's called the tip. It's the very top of the glacier. And then this bit right here, and maybe I'll slap a picture up on the screen so you can see it more in detail, the beading. The area with the beading uses this kind of new to me beading technique that I used in my cuff kairos. That's like this semi-random beading technique that uses a custom bead mix. And I kind of mix those beads to pull in the colors from the Party of 5 set and from the main color that I had chosen. So I kind of blended together size 6 beads, size 8 beads, and Japanese Delica seed beads, and those all got blended together. This section is called the breakup, or the bergy bits, or the growlers. And it has 3 different names because that's what it's called when those pieces of ice break off of glaciers and icebergs. So the breakup, that's kind of obvious. Bergy bits are what those little pieces of ice are called. And I think they're called growlers when they make that noise when they're breaking off, which we actually got to see in Glacier Bay, which is pretty astounding to witness the warming of ice, if you know what I mean. And then the next section of the glacier is the Blowhole Section, my personal favorite section of this whole pattern. We had a lot of really funny jokes about blowholes on the cruise, but we all agreed that what happens on the cruise stays on the cruise. So I can't share them all with you. I will let you know that my husband wasn't sure if calling something a blowhole was like completely appropriate. And, you know, really they're just blowholes. And the reality is one morning I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. It was really light out because the days were very, very long. And we were starting to go through the inner passage. So we had Victoria Island on our left and we were going towards the inner passage, and we had mainland of Canada on our right. And I opened up my door so I could look outside, and I literally saw a whale with its blowhole, like right outside my cabin window, super early in the morning. By the end of the trip, we were all just yelling blowhole all the time and laughing, and it brought us great joy. It was really funny. So that's the blowhole section. All blowholes are is 1-row buttonholes. So if you've done a 1-row buttonhole before, they're super easy. If you haven't, the pattern has video tutorials for doing the beading section and for doing the blowhole, so you'll be completely supported in that. And then once you finish your glacier, you'll see that the glacier is just a square with increases happening at every corner. You put all of those stitches on a holder and go ahead and make 4 more glaciers. And you play with the 5 different colors in the Party of 5 set, or if you're working with your own gradient set, you just match them together. Some people liked their colors to stay close to each other within their glaciers. Some people chose to go as contrasting as possible. That's what I did with mine, but that's completely up to you. And the pattern talks about different ways you can lay out color for the shawl to really become your own. Once all of your glaciers are done, it's time to do these inner passages. And these inner passages go from the bottom of the glacier to the top of the glacier, and they join the 2 glaciers together. This is the same technique that I use in a lot of my shawl patterns. I use it in my Nova sweaters all the time for the side panels. So if you've worked any of those patterns, it will be very familiar to you. If you haven't, this is a great opportunity to learn that technique that I use a lot. So there's 4 inner passages. You guys get that I really named this after the trip a bit. And then once you're done with those 4 inner passages, you pick up all the way around that small rectangle you have that has the 5 glaciers in it and the 4 inner passages. I think you end up with some obscene amount of stitches, like over 700 or 800 stitches on your needle. And then you're just working stockinette stitch in the round until you feel like you want to bind off, or you have about 30 grams of yarn left so you don't run out. And then you work a row or 2 in garter stitch, and then you bind off. I know some people chose to do an attached I-cord bind off instead of doing the bind off I did, which is a great idea. You just want to make sure you give yourself a little more yarn if you're going to do that left over. And you can certainly make that outside area smaller if you don't want that to be as wide and you want your shawl to be a little narrower. That is totally up to you. Wow, that was a lot of words. I gotta breathe for a second, and then I'm going to tell you about a little bit about the design inspiration for the glaciers. So when I first started designing this, I had taken a class about a year ago with Ann Yunsen, who is a phenomenal lace knitter from the Shetland Islands, and I'll put a link to her in the show notes so you could read about her. And I knit this little Shetland lace shawl that she taught us how to knit in class, and it had this really intriguing construction where you work the border first, and then you work quadrants off of that border, and you work 4 quadrants, and then you, on the 2nd and 4th quadrant, you connect them with a garter stitch square, and then you graft these two edges together, and then you graft here and here and here and here, and then finally you graft the border together. And it's such a cool way to make a square shawl, and it was a concept I never really understood until I took the class. And I decided I wanted to try it in just like garter stitch and color, and I did that as an initial square, which you can see here, but I found it to be a tiny bit fiddly, which I try to avoid. And there were like 25 ends to weave in per glacier, right? So if that was like only part of this whole piece, you know, it's not a big deal if there's 25 ends to weave in on this, because then you're done and it's your whole shawl. But if you're then using these as part of a whole piece, I felt like no one would do it. And that's not the point of knitwear design. So I set this aside, and maybe I'm going to revisit this at some point, but not right now. And that's when I came up with the concept for the stockinette stitch area that I ended up putting beads on, and the blowholes. So this is kind of what the design process looks like. I end up putting yarn on the needles and playing around with it until I kind of find what's going to work for me. And there's a lot of knitting and ripping, and there's a lot of piece elements that don't end up getting used as I find what works the best. And then, this is kind of fun, one night Max and I think it was after dinner, and so I was drinking wine and he was doing dishes, because that's what after dinner looks like in my house sometimes. My friend Sarah's behind the camera and she's giggling at that. So I was drawing, and I already knew about the squares, and I was kind of thinking about how I wanted this whole shawl to come together. And Max looks over my shoulder and he's like, "Are you designing kitchen cabinets now?" I was like, "No, not designing kitchen cabinets." But this gives you a good idea. And then I wrote buttons from Alaska, like maybe I would attach it with buttons. And then we decided that maybe people could just pick up some burdock on the trail when they were hiking around and use that as a button, although that's not very good for your knitting. You can see I've got a fish here with some blowholes coming out of it, or a whale. I think it looks a little bit more like a goldfish because my knitting is much better than my drawing. But this is like what design looks like for me, so I think it's kind of fun to see that scary part of my brain, right? Other bits to tell you about with this shawl is there are kits available. There's 4 different colorways in kits. I know some people are choosing to get kits and the pattern is included with the kit, and some people already have gradient sets and stash, and they're going stash diving to see if they can put something together and then making their own bead mixes. I am wearing my friend Laurel's shawl that she made for me to show another colorway. And this is the Firelight colorway, and I figured I would wear it today because I need to send it back to her tomorrow. So this was my last chance to wear it. Thank you, Laurel, for lending it to me. I did wear it one day on the cruise, and I really enjoyed its bright colors. The colorway that the sample was done in, that is mine, is called Swell. And I chose that because the colors really reminded me of Alaska, like the deep, deep brown of the trees, and the blue of the ice, and the blue of the ocean, and the blue of the sky. So that's kind of why I went that way. I was torn and almost went for a green color, but not everybody wears green, and I was trying to find a really accessible color that everybody could work on together. It's hard choosing colors for big groups because color is a place we get to be really individual and have our own favorite likes and our most strong dislikes, right? So just to give you an idea what's in the kit is a party of 5 set from Sweet Georgia. There are 105 yard skeins. They're 28 grams each. And then you get 2 skeins of Tough Love sock, and then a tin with a random bead mix that Belle and I made together this summer. The other colors are up on Etsy. I'll give you guys a link underneath here to that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to tell you about the Bering Shawl. Besides that, this was so fun to knit that I already have a blanket in mind right now in worsted weight yarn that's actually from a local farm in Ithaca. And I think it's going to have 4 squares. It is not going to have the burgee bits. I think it'll have a little bit of lace instead of blowholes, right? So I'm just going to kind of like jump off of it. And then it's going to kind of have a center line and a horizontal line, and it'll be a square. But I'll write it up so you could make it longer or wider if you wanted to. And I actually already have the yarn for that. I just don't have the time to wind it and cast it on. So if anybody has any extra time that they could share with me, that would be awesome, and I would appreciate that. What am I working on right now? I'm working on a lot. I have the September Lola's Choice pattern already done. It is actually being kitted up by Sarah as I speak, or as soon as I'm done speaking and she can get back in the studio and work on kits. I have the N Club for September. That's the last design for 2019. That is all done, and that is what Sarah will be doing once she's done with the Lola's Choice kits, getting those ready to go for you guys. Sign-ups for 2020's N Club will open in September, and you'll get an email about that when they're open. I am working on the design for Knit Ithaca, which is a local retreat I do every year in November, and I actually just got the yarn nailed down for that on Saturday. So I'm working on that design right now, and if I can pull it together, I have a concept for a mystery knit-along cowl that will be a small cowl with maybe some kiviot that I got when I was in Alaska. I'm not sure I can pull it together or not, but it's up here, and I would love to. I'd love to know what you guys are up to. So, you know, leave a note in the comments. I'll put this up on my blog, and it'll be on YouTube, which is probably where you're watching it right now. And I'll put notes up in Ravelry in case that's a place you go to look for stuff. And I can't wait to hear what you think of this. It's really fun to go deep into a design process with you guys. It's not something I do often, and I think that I'd like to start doing it more when I release things that it makes sense, like things that have this big story behind them. Super fun. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.